Welcome, welcome to this slow, gentle story. Here, where time is patient and the velvet hush of night settles across your thoughts, you are safe. You're listening to the modern mystic. This is a world for drifters, dreamers, those on the edge of waking. Tonight, a gentle wandering beside Hildegard of Bingen, not as the world remembers her, but as she truly lived among herbs, shadows, and stones. Just feel the hush. Picture the stones beneath your feet, rough and cold, pressing into your soles. The walls around you thick, breathing the memory of ancient touch. Breath in, breath out. Let your lungs soften. Evenings here always begin with stillness. A thin mist clings to the fields, trickling in through the half-cracked window. The air is cool, almost damp, and somewhere a single candle flickers against the wall. The scent is simple, old paper, bitter herbs, the faint dust of prayer. It is gentle here, nothing demands, nothing expects, everything waits, and so do you. Outside, the world is slow, leaves cradle dew that will never dry, birds hush their wings in the thickets. Somewhere a distant bell marks the hour, but time inside these stone rooms doesn't move in minutes, but in muffled cycles, in the warmth of your breath and the slow return of silence after you exhale. Hildegard sits nearby, bundled in a dark woolen robe, her fingers stained with earth and the powder of dried roots. She moves with a patience learned through years of repetition. Her gaze is set not on glory, but on the quiet weight of today. You are invited to sit, cross-legged, on cool flagstones. The dust is so fine you can trace gentle lines with your finger, circles and spirals, forgetting what you came in for. Nothing is urgent. Even the sky seems to accept that, edged in bruised gray, clouds leaning down to watch. A deep green bench rests against the wall, paint cracked, showing stories underneath. The world narrows to a table. Here, Hildegard has stacked bowls of dried nettle, rosemary cut in the earliest morning, a dark clay jar of honey, sticky around the rim. Glass bottles tucked into shadow reveal delicate runes scratched in the glass, names for plants you have never spoken aloud. The air flickers with the faint breath of sage, burning slow in a carved basin. Around you, the stones hold chill from all the nights before, and you sense you are among centuries, the echoes of others who have entered, seeking healing, peace, or only the comfort of being unseen. None of these hours are wasted. Hildegard moves quietly, choosing each leaf with patience. Her hands are brown, mapped with gentle lines. The candlelight draws a thin shadow on her cheek. She hums an old melody, wrapped in the rising scent of mint. You listen not for words, but for presence. Here, presence is a companion. A hush settles. The air is thick, tenderly dark around the window where rain beads in trembling pearls. Your own hands rest, unhurried, on your lap, the rhythm of your heart echoing the pace of this old, sacred life. The cup beside you is heavy clay. You feel its warmth between your palms. Nothing should happen now. You only need to notice the steadiness of stone, the breath of sage, the patience of distant stars. She does not rush, and you do not need to hurry. In the slow world of stones and herbs, time folds, and you are welcome to linger. The candle trembles again. Shadows move quietly along the floor. You might notice a single thread of spider silk glinting in the window's draught, or the gentle brush of fabric as Hildegard stands, pours warm water over the herbs, and silence returns, deeper this time. You are allowed to drift. You are allowed to release the day's tight memories. For tonight, you belong to this hush, this small circle of warmth. The story will move even slower than your breathing, guiding you into a softer place. Let the mist gather around your thoughts. Let the stones remind you what it is to be steady. Let your breath become the invitation. The world, beneath its heavy woolen cloud, rests on the edge of another morning. Morning never dawns all at once. It seeps in, barely a breath, through stone cracks and curtains faded from the sun. On this day, as on so many others, Hildegard wakes before the city stirs. Her room is cool. The rough linen of her blanket, still tangled from sleep, carries the faintest memory of warmth. She reaches for the edge, fingers remembering the texture, the way the cloth softens, year after slow-washed year. She lingers there, quiet, as shadows drift slowly across the walls. The stone floor is gently cold against her feet. Her hands move, habitual and soft, feeling the little ridges in the grain of wood as she sits at the edge of her bed. She feels her own pulse, slow and steady, in her palms. Light has not yet broken. Still, she listens for the song of water gathering quietly in the clay jug on her table. There is always the same comfort in this dreamy monotony. Ceramic glaze cool against her thumb, wood creaking as she shifts her weight. The jug is heavy this morning. She pours the water slowly into a pewter bowl. She listens to it, listens to the hush and hum of water sinking, the gentle hush of living things waking. Her sleeves dip into the coolness, fabric drinking in the day's first light. She watches droplets gather at the tips of her fingers and lets her gaze linger, unhurried, as sunlight begins to trace along the pattern in the stone windowsill. Her toes curl again on the chilled floor, and she stretches, arms reaching, spine soft and long, before she brings her hands to her face, feeling both the dew of water and the beginning of warmth. The pace of the morning is a kindness she gives herself. She wraps herself in another layer, a rough brown habit made softer at the hem from years of use. The wool smells faintly of dried lavender and the ghost of yesterday's gardens. The cloth rests on her shoulders, heavy but familiar. The window is cracked, just a sliver, letting the sense of the damp earth rise, the air clean and dark, and filled with the promise of herbs and rain. There is a rhythm she keeps. She lights the first candle of the morning, the flame stutters, whispers upward, and settles into a quiet glow. The box of wax is chipped, the matches worn smooth in her fingers. She watches the wick, how it blooms from black to gold, and waits for a moment, breathing in the sweet, honeyed smoke. Light pools slowly across the table, soaking into old papers and the coarse clay cup beside the window. There is nothing to hurry. Hildegard sits for a moment more, hands wrapped around the cup, feeling the warmth press into her palms. Beneath the pale hush, she arranges her writing board, ink pot, and a cloth to wipe the nib. The wood is cool, parked with days and seasons gone by. She runs her fingertip over the edge, noticing a nick she has felt 100 times, maybe 1,000. She flattens a crumpled slip of paper, smoothing its corners. Every crease and fold holds evidence of mornings just like this. The spoon clinks against the small earthen bowl on her table, and she listens, pausing with intention, as if the sound itself is a prayer. Outside, a gentle wind nudges the shutters. Shadows flicker on the wall, shapes that shift but return again and again. She glances to her small bundle of dried herbs, rosemary and sage, hung by cotton twine. She reaches out, brushing rough leaves with her fingertips, breathing in the bitter green scent. She remembers to notice the weight of her own hands, the familiar feel of the stems between her thumb and forefinger. That weight is steadying. Today, as ever, Breakfast is simple, a piece of crusty bread torn open with slow hands. She notices the hard edge, the fragrance of yesterday's baking, the coolness of goat's cheese softening on her tongue. The cup warms once again in her palms, this time thick, fragrant tea brewed from her own garden. Every sip is quiet, the steam braiding itself through the morning chill. The taste is herbaceous and deep, grounding her before the world asks for her attention. Nothing happens, and that is enough. The gentle repetition is a song. The sound of chewing, the soft thud as she sets the cup down, the shifting weight of her sleeve as she eats. She slows for these small things. They become anchors, pulling her from dreams and memory into something new but utterly safe. She watches her own breath move in the candlelight. There is a peace in this sameness. Each ritual, worn smooth by use, offers a small reminder she is here. The world turns quietly. It is morning. She lingers. Beneath the window, the breeze has changed a little. The herbs swing more gently. She brushes crumbs from the table, feeling the rough grain of wood beneath her palm. She sits a moment longer, tracing the gentle arch of her own wrist, the familiar dip of the wooden chair. A bird stirs outside, then quiets again. Hildegard breathes deeply, letting the newness of the day settle quietly on her skin. In these first moments, she finds herself again. At the edges of waking, she is only breath and heartbeat, cool cloth and candlelight, waiting for whatever comes next, quiet. This was the first word most days, not spoken, just felt. Hildegard sat by the heavy oaken table, breath sinking into the hush. Morning never rushed here instead. It crept, warm and brown, through the small glass window, landing on scraps of dried sage and parchment. She waited. The hum of her world did not come from voices, not from laughter or stories or the quick rustle of feet. It rose very slow, from the steady motion of hands meeting surface, meeting task, again and again. They were not holy hands, not especially. They were just her own. But the work was holy, perhaps, because it emptied her. First was ink, always ink, a little stone part, sometimes cold to touch, black as sleep. She lifted the quill, its tip still stained from the day before. There was no hurry. Her breath moved in and out. She drew the line she needed, or sometimes nothing at all. Sometimes the first line was only air, moving thoughts from one space to another. Then paper. Not paper, vellum. The animal smell had faded after months, but it survived in the corners, in the thickness under her palm. She turned the page, felt the grain. She liked to rest her wrist in the same spot each day. The faintest mark, a memory of work done. The paper waited, soft and patient. She closed her eyes a moment. Candles flickered in their cups. The world around her was hushed, but not asleep. Far off in the stone corridors, a broom was being dragged. Bread was cooling somewhere unseen. Time moved, but only just. Now the herbs. Sprigs of yarrow, bundled clumsily the night before. Hildegard reached for time next, careful not to scatter crumbs onto her scrolls. Time always crumbled. It liked to fall apart when she brushed against it, the leaves dusting everything with sharp, green scent. She paused, listening for the sigh of the wind at the window. The bench was hard beneath her. The grain of the wood ran smooth under her fingertips. Murmurs of work sum up most days here. Not great moments, just motions. She scraped calendula petals from a shallow wooden tray, the powder bright as morning yolks. Each time she let her mind wander, maybe to the sound of a quill re-dipping in ink, maybe to the gentle cough of another sister beyond the wall. Here in this space, tasks did not end, they blended, one into another, soft and slow. She breathed in crushed rosemary. Her sleeves grew smudged, faded green from handling so much plant life. She never minded the stains. Stains meant the work had happened, that the days were full enough. She looked up to see shadows move on the floor. She worked by those shadows, not by clocks. When the light shifted halfway across the tile, it was time to close the pots, sweep the petals. She waited by the window. Sometimes there was interruption, a bell calling for prayer, or the shuffle of a novice needing guidance, her brow creased with questions. But mostly it was the smallness of movement that mattered. Quill to ink, hand to stock, mortar to bowl, the rhythm never really changed. Even on the hardest mornings, when the air grew cold and her joints stiffened, she moved carefully. No need to hurry, no need to impress. There was only the hum of simple repetition, each act handed over to the next with kindness. She found comfort in patterns. The way she stacked glass jars, aligning their cloudy rims so the sun would hit each one. The methodical snip of scissors cutting handfuls of dill. The rattle as seeds fell, soft, into her cupped hand. These were the moments that made hours drift, soft and slow. Nothing happened, and that was enough. She wiped her hands on her robe. The fabric rough, comforting. She'd touch her temple sometimes, feeling the heat of her own thoughts, noticing how they slowed here, how a task, repeated, could hush the louder noise inside. There was something gentle about that. She leaned her elbow on the table, watching the dust swirl in a wedge of morning light. All the motions melting, from scroll to ink to herb to scroll again, flows and returns. She moved from bench to apothecary shelves, fingers trailing over small clay bowls. Here was chamomile, here was nettle, each with its own story, each waiting for her hands. She lifted a bundle, breathed it in, placed it down, paused to press a crease from her robe, then returned to grinding fennel seeds, slow and circular. The quiet dust drifted upward. The mortar clinked, gentle, soft as a heartbeat. Shadows deepened, light shifted. She'd lose herself so easily in these rhythms. She'd forget the hour or the reason for a task, only remembering the feel of the leaf, the smell of the oil, the weight of the pestle, the hum of the day, slow and unending. Work, and then again work. The kind that never really ends, but never truly tires you either. Nothing happened, and that was enough. Hildegard sits by her window. The glass is old, wavy. Each morning she gazes out, the world blurred in gentle ribbons, wet and green, or dry and golden, depending on the breath of the season. She learns the rhythm of the year by looking and listening, long before she names a leaf or dries a petal in her hand. Winter begins with silence, a hush that feels almost holy. The cold stones beneath her feet press their chill upward. She wraps her shawl tighter, tucks her fingers into her sleeves. The world outside is gray, the light thin as soup ladled at dusk. By the window, frost spiders across the corners. She touches the pane, then draws back. Her breath leaves soft fog there, brief, vanishing. The gardens sleep. The herbs she loves nestle deep in earth. It is a season of stillness, roots holding tight, shadows long and patient, light stealing away early to somewhere unseen. She sets a mug near the flames. The fire pops, warm and crackling, and the window holds the cold at bay. She sits, she waits. The tea steams upward, spicy with dried ginger. The warmth in her hands feels brighter because the room is so chilly. She listens, air rustling through bare branches, the hum of distant voices. There is nowhere urgent to be, only this slow comfort. Nothing happens, and that is enough. The days tick towards spring, and with each sunrise wetness returns. The thaw begins as a whisper, drip, drip, drip from the eaves. The stones sweat in the hallway. Earth turns to mud beneath her sandals. She gathers her skirts and steps around puddles, one foot, then another. In her hands she cradles seeds, small as crumbs, feeling the promise in their weight. Through the window, water glimmers on each leaf. She breathes deeper, smells moss, rain, something cool and alive curling through her chambers. Outside, green starts to spread, first a haze, then a flourish. Hildegard leaves the window open a crack. Warm air seeps inside, mingling with the cold, swirling around ankles and drifting into her sleeves. The room smells different now. The herbs, still shy, poke their heads from the garden beds. She watches water bead on their leaves, little tents of moisture reflecting morning. Every hour the light shifts, brighter and longer, shadows crossing her desk like silent pilgrims. She marks time not with bells, but with clouds. Some days are soft, white, swollen with damp, others clear and cold and sharp. Rain tapping lightly at the pane, or wind carrying the green scent of distant meadows. The seasons move slowly. Each one is a window, offering its own view. Now silver and grey, soon gold and warm. In summer, the stones lose their chill. The fire fades into memory. The air at dawn is already warm against her skin, brushing her cheek as she leans by the old window. Sunlight crawls across the floorboards, finding dust in the corners, painting gold shapes on her work table. She opens the shutters wide, lets the world wander in. Herbs hang in bunches above the door, their fragrance thick, sweet, peppery, familiar. Bees hum nearby. The heat sinks through walls, turning the room gentle and lazy. Her fingers pinch thyme, crush rosemary. Oils slick her hands, scent lifted high. She pauses, listens to the song of late summer wind, to wood creaking, to her own steady breath. Some days a sudden rain patters onto stone. It rattles the window. The garden, thirsty, drinks. Coolness returns, a small mercy in the bright stretch of summer. She stands by the glass, watching, her own reflection layered over green world outside. Wet and dry, warm and cold. One inside, one beyond. And when autumn arrives, cool threads through the abbey again. Yellow and red stain the trees. Leaves bunch and scuttle against the old walls. The window is fogged each new morning. Her finger draws patterns, slow spirals on the glass. She feels the change in her bones. Evenings come sooner. Flame returns to the hearth, banishing damp from the corners. She waits for soup, smell of roots and herbs mingled together, wrapping the room in comfort as shadows climb the walls. Each season is a friend, each change a quiet instruction. She waits by the window, watches the seasons wheel, one into the next. Wet then dry, warm flame against cold stone. Birdsong shifting to the hush of crickets, then to wind whistling through the gaps. In every hour, a little more of the world changes shape. And Hildegard sits, steady and gentle, where inside meets outside, always listening, always learning, always noticing which world will meet her in the new light. Sometimes, in the stone corridors where the draught lingered, Hildegard would pause with a bundle of rosemary in her hand. Footsteps would echo far off, sometimes a novice moving quietly, sometimes just the sound of the wind slipping in beneath oak doors and around worn slippers. There, in the shade by the arches, two figures might pass one another. Not speaking, not yet, just a recognition, a glance that hovered in the cool air, as steady and gentle as the weight of that first sip of morning broth. She'd nod, and the other woman would nod in reply. Nothing more was ever needed. The light would come through the small, imperfect window panes, making little shapes on the stone. Hildegard often found herself standing in these patches, holding her basket, waiting for heat to seep into her palms. Sometimes a sister would join her, cautious and slow, carrying her own collection of wild leaves and petals. They'd stand together, side by side, listening maybe to the sound of distant bells, a world beyond the soft work of hands in the present moment. Words came later, always after long silences. The shadow of a greeting hung there, the comfort of someone else breathing with you, not breaking the quiet. In the afternoons, as thin soup was ladled into deep clay bowls, she'd watch kindness move around the table. Not grand, just a loaf torn and held out, a piece of green pear shared. Some laughter would rise gently as the steam from the broth curled upward and softened the air. Ears listened for the sound of someone swallowing, a sigh, the scraping of a wooden spoon against a well-used bowl. Everything seemed to move on the simple hinges of patience and attention. She noticed how each person let themselves be carried by the hush between phrases, and how, sometimes, care grew only in these untouched stretches, when you waited before offering a reply. Sometimes a novice would linger at the edge of the herbarium, uncertain. Hildegard's hands would be busy, sorting dried lavender, sifting cool earth through her fingers. She wouldn't look up right away. Instead, she listened for the hush in her own mind before she welcomed anyone in. Then, gently, an invitation, a smile given, a seat offered, one more cup poured for the work table. The novice would exhale, always, as though this ritual of being allowed into her presence was an old song even they barely remembered. Silence held every corner. Sometimes her eyes would meet another's across a row of clay pots. No story, no worries spoken aloud, just the small warmth of being noticed. Again and again, their work would fold into the gentle rhythm of the room. She would turn a leaf in her palm, slow, slow, waiting for the memory of sunlight to rise from it. The novice would glance over, then back to their own task. No hurry, just the hymn of things done side by side, the promise that there would always be time for another quiet morning, another hand reaching for thyme or sage. On sleepier afternoons, as shadows grew longer on the flagstones, even the sounds between women became softer. Hands washed in a shared basin, a sigh after kneeling, the quiet click of a latch. Hildegard understood these patterns better than words. Each day was full of small negotiations, the sound of fabric brushing in the hall, an apology spoken wordlessly as someone stepped aside, the gift of a warm stone set in the window for aching hands. Again and again the world repeated itself. Footsteps, glances, silence, warmth blooming in a cup just poured. Sometimes they gathered by the garden's edge, wrapped in brown cloaks. Cold air pressed gently against their cheeks. She watched the way each woman held herself, shoulders softening, faces open to the fading afternoon light. They spoke sometimes of weather, sometimes of aches. Often they just watched the leaves tremble in the breeze. Hildegard set her hands around her cup, felt the returning heat, and remembered that every gesture could be an answer, that echoes didn't always need words to ring out. Some relationships were built of repeated pauses, of tea refilled, sleeves adjusted, gazes met without expectation. She waited at the window, feeling the day hush around her. A novice approached, holding fresh rosemary. Hildegard took it, brushed her fingers against theirs for just an instant, barely a touch, but enough. Enough to say, I see you. I'm here. Together we listen for the next echo. The day began as it always did, with silence. There was no rush, only the hush beneath the stone arches and the murmur of distant choirs, lost somewhere beyond the kitchen walls. Hildegard sat, her back straight but soft, hands folded in her lap, letting the hush settle in before moving. Clouds pressed themselves against the thin window glass, pale and unbothered, the same clouds as yesterday, the same as the day before. A little chill lingered. She listened, not for voices, not for answers, but for the sound of water in the kettle, creaking to a sleepy boil. She waited. There was no need for hurry. She had nowhere to go, nothing to prove, nothing to prepare for. A day of nothing, and so much of nothing becomes something if you listen closely. Hildegard traced her fingers along the old wood of the table. The same knot in the grain, the same scratch from a dropped knife, barely visible. Here she was, and here was the room. She drew a breath slow, filling her chest with the coolness left from the night. Breath in, pause, breath out. Again and again. The cloth on her lap, a thin wool, rough in one spot, mended in another, was as familiar as her own skin. Nothing changed. Everything stayed in its quiet place. The fields outside would be the same. The grass grew in thin, green waves, never hurried. Every morning, the same curve of the earth rolled out beyond the abbey. Light broke through the clouds, not in a hurry, not restless, just gently drifting as if the sun, too, had nowhere it needed to be. Every step on the packed dirt path was a step she might have taken before. Last season, last year, every day since she began to remember herself. She paused before the door, finding her own breath in the cold air, finding the fine pattern the frost left on the small, round window. She waited by the window, watched the same little birds land, peck, and fly again. In the courtyard, nothing truly changed. Shadows shaped themselves into new arms as the morning stretched, moving inch by slow inch across the paving stones. She pressed her palm to the cool glass and closed her eyes. Another breath, and then she stood, letting her body remember how to move when there is nothing urgent to do. Feet in slippers, cloth at her breast, hands brushing gently across the memory of yesterday. The sounds from the hallway, quiet steps, a cough, the distant rattle of a wooden pail, did not rush her. She was held by the ordinary. It was enough. She sat for a little while, facing the window, watching clouds hang heavy and unmoving. She liked these mornings with nothing set before her. No visitor to see, no letter to write, no herb to cut or count. Just the comfort of a day stretched out wide and long, softly blurred at the edges. Sometimes she traced letters in her mind, not to write them, but to feel their shapes. Again and again, the arch of the H, the lean of the L, the gentle curve of the D, slow, lingering thoughts. The fire in the hearth was barely breathing. She took a moment to notice how its light moved across the stone. A flicker, pause, another flicker, then a full stop. She let her hand settle near its gentle heat, feeling the warmth circulate through her fingers. Nothing happened, and that was enough. She closed her eyes and listened to the room breathe with her, a slow and steady rhythm. The spoon clinked against the cup. Hildegard's thoughts returned, as they often did, to the same old cloth she wore, to the same taste of the morning's simple bread. She ran her thumb along the crust, noticed the roughness, noticed the flour left white in the lines of her hand, the taste of salt familiar. She took small bites, letting the flavor sit, in no hurry to clear the plate. Each swallow felt layered, like the fog that pressed itself close to the monastery walls. Soft, ordinary, complete. She sat for a little while more, watching the same thick fog drift by, pressing against the same walls, leaving the same faint mist on the window's ledge. Even the spoon by her cup carried the same curve as yesterday, light glinting just so along its edge. She tipped it, watched the reflection bend with quiet curiosity. Again and again the spoon moved. Again the quiet. Again the same old nothing becoming something else. There were days for letters, and days for brewing, and days for singing with the rest of the sisters. But today was a day with nothing built into the bones. Her steps circled the kitchen to tidy a cup, then paused. Another circle, a glance to the door, both of them still, and then another slow sit, as if the morning could be stretched even thinner. The same hallway, the same dark pattern in the wood, the candle stub in its brass cup. She touched the candle, turned it, felt its coolness and the softness where it melted long ago. She let her finger rest there, tracing the line over and over. Through the window the sky was unbroken grey. She remembered, almost without thinking, these clouds would drift, these slippers would scuff, these hands would fill again soon enough. For now, repetition was a warm shelter. For now, doing nothing was a kind of prayer. The fire stilled. Only the slow pulse of her own breath, the gentle rattle of the door in the wind, the simple weight of the world pressing close and not asking more from her than this. To sit, to notice, to wait by the window. She smiled at the sameness. She let the day unravel, thread by thread, into the plain, sacred quiet of a world that rushed for nothing. Each moment was slow, each moment was safe. She let it be so. The spoon clinked against the cup, nothing happened, and that was enough. The wind pried gently at the corners of stone, unseen but always there. In Hildegard's chamber, the hour did not demand genius, only presence. The shadows flickered quietly, not seeking her attention. Candlelight moved beside her, its flame rising, then lowering, every time Hildegard let a slow breath out upon it. The room was silent except for the small, steady rhythms. The faint rattle of the window against its frame, the scent of earth drifting up from the garden paths below, and again, the scratching of her quill, soft and steady on rough parchment. Most days began quiet, just so. The candle by her side was more than habit. It was anchor, companion, echo. Its wick stood tall, charred black, soaking up the wax as Hildegard's eyes drifted between flame and page. As she exhaled, the candle's tip bowed in agreement, like it listened to secrets only she could speak. The quill scratched. The page whispered back. Again, that sound, feather on parchment, scratch, scratch, then the softest rush of breath, barely moving the warm light. There was nothing special about these beginnings. She gathered her tools with hands she barely looked at. The ink pot crusted at its mouth, the dry stem of her pen, the clean page, not yet bearing the complicated stories of plants and pains, grief and remedy. Everything lay in waiting. She had not yet dreamed or claimed her visions. She only sat, knees drawn close beneath the bench, arranging leaves and jars, scratching her quill to life. Every few moments she paused, listening for the day. Did she hear the kitchen's ladle stirring, the bread being cut? Did footsteps pass, cloaked by wool and duty? She let life slip around her unnoticed. What stirred most was not in the world, but in the half-lit center of the room. The candle's breath swayed with hers. She leaned forward and felt the wax pool, cradle of light, nearly still. Somewhere in the distant halls, bells muttered a low greeting and were gone. She scratched the quill again. The structure of her routine was invisible, the way air holds scent or a day clings to its weather. It fed her, these repetitions, the spells of untangling dried time, the careful inventory of roots, the weighing of powder on an old plate. The humdrum tasks, marking clean jars with faint letters, binding stems with dull twine, scratching, always scratching the quill, became the structure around which a million invisible thoughts could rest. Each breath changed the shape of the candle's curve. Sometimes it trembled from her sigh. Sometimes it did not move at all. She noticed. The more she noticed, the less the world asked of her. She could be only this in this moment. A woman with a small, boring kingdom, herb parts and recipe scraps, pins and cords, the faint glimmer of night air against the window glass. Every time her wrist ached, she paused. Every time ink blotted, she smiled at its little mistake. In slowness, inspiration does not enter like a bird at midday. It arrives as faint, habitual comfort. Scratch, scratch, she waited by the candle's edge. She waited by the window. There were times when her mind wandered far, into fields she'd never visit, stories too bright to hold. But here, Hildegard pressed down on the surface of the moment. Here was her genius, making knots with twine, marking herb jars with names too long for sleep. Every breath, the candle leaned toward her. Every sigh, shadows crept creeplessly along the floor. Night still reigned, and genius had not yet been invented. The scratching of the quill, softer now, lulled the room. She scratched again. She watched the flame bow, then straighten, a secret listener to even smaller dreams. The day starts inside a cool stone cell, soft as a well-worn robe, sliding over shoulders in the thinning morning light. The robe, rough against her forearms, is a bridge from sleep to day. She listens, not for bird calls, but for the hush of others rising, slippers shuffling over distant flagstones. Her feet memorize the memory of stone with every step, pressing footprints into quiet history. The floor is forever cool, even when the sun leans through the thick glass above her head. She walks, robe brushing her calves, to the little wash bowl at the wall. Today is like yesterday, like the day before. Yet inside this sameness, Hildegard finds different shades of peace. There is always a moment of stillness as she cinches her belt, listening for the distant echoes from the alley between convent walls, someone closing a door, the ricochet of a bucket against stone, laughter soft as lint drifting in. That sound, muffled and fleeting, threads through her life, never quite leaving. Her hands know each herb jar by weight. She never hurries. Dried lavender, feathery and clean, rosemary that tugs at memory, her fingers travel these textures, pausing on each stoppered lid. In the silence, there's company, the rustle of another robe in the hall, the steady breathing of a neighbor moving toward chapel prayer. Hildegard pulls the cowl deeper over her cheeks, letting the fabric settle like a hand above her heart. Outside her window, shadows drift across stonework, slow as spilled ink. She moves to a table by the tiny window, unwrapping a cloth-wrapped loaf. She tears off a corner, chews slowly. The bread is rough but honest, leaving crumbs that cling to her thumbs. Her other hand rests on the robe's thick seam, anchoring her to daylight. The robe is a tether, a gentle self-reminder, still here, still within. Her day turns in quiet spirals. She measures herbs by the beam of morning sun, the angle changing hour by hour. Sometimes she stands very still, just to feel the coolness of the stone seeping through the soles of her feet. Sometimes she thinks she hears yesterday's footsteps echoing in today's corridor. The echo folds over itself. Now, then, now again. A tapping in the near alley calls her to the garden. She trades the hush of indoor stone for sunlight's shy warmth. Kneeling, she touches the leaves of sage, the soft fuzz catching morning dew. Her robe gathers earth along the hem, dust crumbles in the creases, each bit a memory of labor, of patience. The garden is not hers alone. Others pass quietly by, their movements brushing up the alley. Still, the stone's memory returns beneath her knees. The garden wall holds a deeper silence than any prayer could measure. Noon meal is thin broth, warm between her hands. She sits with others, heads bent, spoons rising in the same rhythm. But inside, she notices the robe again pressing at her shoulders, and beneath the table, her heel finds the cold line of grout between the stones. The chanting from the chapel winds through the open door, unraveling itself slow and sure. Quiet laughter drifts from outside. The alley's echo never entirely leaves. After the meal comes work, more tasks along quiet corridors. Letters to copy, herbs to bundle, pots to fill with simple balm. Her fingertips remain dusted with rosemary. She pauses to adjust her robe's sleeve, as if rolling the day across her skin. The air shifts. An afternoon chill threading up from the alley, whispering under doors, setting her thoughts wandering. The robe, heavy but welcome, grows softer as the day ages. Twilight falls unnoticed. She stands by a high window, arms tucked inside her sleeves, letting her robe shield her from the cooling air. Stone meets bare feet once more, the memory of each footfall layering itself. Alley, corridor, garden. Shadows unfold in every corner. She stands very still, listening for familiar echoes. She waits as if the stone itself remembers. The day draws inward. She sits on her cart, robe pulled gently around her shins, candles trembling on the far wall. The robe is always there, warm against her skin, holding the hush of the convent close. With every slow breath, stone and fabric and echo come together. Nothing has truly changed. The alley outside, shaded in memory, still carries the soft, shuffling hush of feet at dusk. Nothing happened, and that was enough. There was an hourglass in Hildegard's cell, not a large one, just glass fitted between two turned knobs of softened wood, small enough that it slept easily beside her herbs. It had lived 100 places in this little world, atop a sheet of thick paper, beneath the arch of her window, cradled, nestling against old pressed time. Tonight that hourglass was ash-flecked. Grey dust clung to its sides from the morning fire. There was a thumbprint there from where she'd once wiped the glass clean, and another smudge, older, trailing through pollen and the greenish tinge of dried chamomile. She picked it up. Sometimes she turned the hourglass absent-mindedly, letting the sand slide in the hush. Tonight her fingers traced the glass edge, feeling where it was cold and where it held the warmth of sun through stone walls. Her sleeve, always rough with the smell of lavender crushed in the fold, brushed over the little mound of ash at the base. The ash clung, weightless, part of last night's prayers carried into the day. She didn't mind. Ash was soft. It marked everything gently. Even her herbs surrendered to it. There, over marjoram. There, in the notch between rosemary and wild mustard, a ghost of grey. The hourglass was not beautiful. It was ordinary and unfinished, with one end chafed slightly from use. The wooden base seemed from a century of hands. She tipped it. The sand fell, slow as dusk. every grain piling against memory. She remembered the first time it had tipped over unbidden, rolling softly from her desk, a little thump, a cloud of dust as if it had exhaled. She laughed then, and pressed her palm against the mark it left on her parchment, the smallest grey oval. Hildegard waited there, listening. Sometimes she would set the hourglass on its side, feeling the shift of sand press against her fingers. Was it time? Was it always just beginning? The shape of the glass matched her grasp, round and inevitable. Its narrow neck, always catching a few grains, reminded her of words stuck in the throat, of prayers half spoken, always something sacred suspended, not falling yet. She closed her eyes. She breathed in, letting the ash smoke scent linger, old logs burned to powder, the faintest trace in her hair. The silence pressed in. She heard the stilled garden outside the window, the low echo of distant bells. She upended the hourglass again, grain by grain. Time was ordinary here, marked not by clocks, but by the soft scrape of sand, by the weight of ash on her table, by the shimmer of light through glass thickened with fingerprints. A wren's song came and went outside. The sand inched through, more memory than measure. Hildegard set the hourglass beside the rosemary now, close to its dry-smelling limbs. She pressed her thumb into the ash-mottled glass, making a deeper print. Nothing would come clean. Not truly. The mark stayed, wordless, like a prayer pressed into earth. She leaned close and felt the echo of all she'd counted. Leaves, hours, meals, silences. The hourglass was so plain, and yet every side showed where she had been. Old wax from a spilled candle, the faint scratch of her nail, the tiniest green fleck from a peppermint stem crushed between her hands. In the quiet, as she turned the object, Hildegard could smell everything that had passed. Tea, time, ink, the holy smoke of fasting evenings, all gathered past and present. Each time she set it down, the sand shifted again. He waited by the window, so little changed. So much was always gathering, pressing, leaving traces behind. She breathed out, and the hourglass drew her breath inside the glass. Nothing happened, and that was enough. There are evenings when the room settles early, and the only movement is the flutter of shadow, cast by a candle burning half low. Hildegard sits at a heavy wood table, herbs in orderly rows, parchment at her elbow. The soft hush of her breath joins the rhythm of darkness inching in, slipping through window cracks across the stone. She does not grip the years, not really. They move gently, floating in her mind like dust in morning light, never settling fully. A fine wrinkle at the corner of her eye, another at her mouth, folded into laughter at something left unsaid. A thousand subtle creases painting her hands, the story of each herb she has gathered and sorted, each letter she has written by flickering flame, each moment she pressed a cool leaf to her cheek to remember its scent. A sigh sometimes escapes her, long and loose as the coat she wears now, older, softer, and not as fast to warm. The breath she lets out is the kind that comes when someone recalls, but does not hold too tightly. The kind that tastes of rosemary, mint, and quiet years. Her fingers trail over the labels she tied to her jars, the script old and faded. She sees the veins on her hands, rivers under lamplit skin, and the lines feel less like marks, more like maps. Maps of memory, but not memory's ache, just memory's hush. The room glows yellow with candlelight, each wavering shadow like a new wrinkle slipped across the plaster, folding itself into calm. The wrinkles and the candlelight belong together, soft ridges, soft flickers, no need to correct or cover. She looks at the curling edge of a bay leaf, pinched between her thumb and first finger. She holds it up, sees how the shadow it casts on her palm echoes the folds by her eyes. Wrinkle next to wrinkle, shadow next to shadow. She smiles softly, hearing footsteps in memory, the gentle hush of others in distant halls, moving carefully so as not to disturb the quiet retreat. Some nights she pulls her shawl tighter, feeling the comfort in pressed cloth, the frayed edge familiar in her grip. She breathes in, slow, remembering fields damp with dew and sun-bleached stone beneath her sandals so many, many seasons ago. She does not reach for those mornings. She lets them float by, just as a breath, just as a slight shift in shadow. The spoon clinked against the cup outside, leaves rustle on the path, scraping soft warnings of colder months ahead. Her life has become this gentle weathering, this warmth held inside as winds change. Shadows gather beneath her eyes now, but she feels no sadness in this. She sees the wisdom in the weathered, the quiet grace in what ages. She remembers how, as a girl, she traced lines in the earth to plant her seeds. Now lines trace her, and the world feels smaller, safer. She touches a dried violet, its color unchanged, its petals wrinkled like the skin on her knuckles. The old breath returns, the one that comes with recall, with the nearly there. She does not chase the days, only lets them brush against her, light as a candle's flame, remembered but not gripped. The wind rattles the shutters. She waits for the silence to return, lets her mind rest in the fold between light and dark, youth and old age. The candle settles into its pool of wax. She sees the shadow in the glass, her own face, rippling in the yellow, never quite the same from one night to the next. There are some who fear the folding in of time, the gathering of years. But Hildegard finds peace in this slow layering of days. When she looks out the leaded window, the garden gone soft and grey, she lets time press gently against her. She traces circles in the dust, closes her eyes, and offers a breath as light and loose as before. Nothing happens, and that was enough. Night in the stone corridors again. Hildegard stands at her work table, looking into the shadows pressed thick against the walls. Only the softest breath of wind lifts the tabby cloth near her window. Even silence ripples tonight. The echo of chanting long past seems to hum inside her chest, as if her heart remembers the shape of sound after it's gone. Everything is softened, the angles, the hours, the shape of her own hands. Wax melts in a brass dish by her elbow, the candle's light bending gently. The woman watches its glow, thinking, sometimes, that memory isn't a thing that sits still. It sweeps outward, echo by echo, like a stone dropped in midnight water. What is pressed in wax is not sealed. It shimmers, it pools, it rises. The scent of rosemary lingers from the mortar, pine resin and crushed clover. She closes her eyes, feeling the hush swelling, the slow cradle hum drift up from somewhere far beneath her ribs. She listens long. The hum is not of voices, not of wind, but of the garden itself, the little song that hovers over each herb, each blade of violet green. In these midnight stretches, thoughts lose their names, images wax into shadow, then melt at the edges, rippling into new forms. Time folds over itself here, everything echoing, everything rippling. She lifts the simple stone weight in her hand, feeling how memory, too, is shaped and reshaped, wax melting against the memory of her fingertips. A moth taps at the glass. There's comfort in the repetition. Tap, tap, tap. Everything keeps returning. Even the shadows sheltered in the corners come loose, drifting across stone and straw, shifting spaces. Still, nothing truly leaves, nothing finished, and that was enough. She lets the wax memory of wild time and sage swirl behind her eyelids. The room fills with the soundless hum, somewhere between a cradle song and the soft vibration of bees drawn to clover in their secret hour. In this place her mind floats, dream sense rising up. Symbols drift past, a sprig of nettle as an answer, a cracked window as invitation. She doesn't try to gather them, only lets the slow tide carry each shape across her chest. A ripple and then another, echoes folding back in soft invitation. She is more listening than thinking. She is more floating than standing. Time folds again. Wax melts again. Once she dreamt of a field so wide it swallowed the sky. Then she woke, and somewhere beneath her ribs the hum rose, cradle soft, and she had to hold it a while longer. Nights like this, she understands. The ripples never stop. The candle never truly gutters. Each echo lingers, melts, rises, and she returns over and over, not to answers, but to the slow remembering. She waits by the window. She lets the wax image of lavender and pine melt into another hour. The hum rises, falls, and rises again. It whispers, all things return in their own small season. Every echo a cradle, every ripple a rest. She closes her eyes and drifts with the quiet, the soft wax of knowing, melting at the edges, folding once more into the darkness that is never empty, never gone, always enough. The steps grow softer now, slow and gentle, steady and grounding. Every footfall is a soft press upon the earth, a quiet call to descend. Down a long stone hallway, the footsteps echo, slower, slower, like a lull. Their steady rhythm weaves a hush that closes the day's pages, easing the world into quiet. Outside, night tucks itself around the abbey, thick and velvety, drawing back the world's sharpness. Inside the herb room, it is almost entirely still. Breaths come in and out, easy, unhurried, each one misting the air, then fading. The weight of dusk hangs at the window, drawn across the panes like a curtain, then drawn again. The light softens, clouds thicken, the veil of sleep thickens, softer with every pass, darker, heavier, across tired eyes. A kettle, just off boil, sighs on the wooden table. Steam uncurls in dreamlike ribbons, making the cold air alive for just a moment. The day's last herbs steep quietly, filling the air with sleepy, sweet scents, lemon balm, chamomile, dried linden blossoms. Hands fold, rest atop the table. There is nowhere to be but here, nowhere to hurry to, nothing to plan. Each inhale is lighter now. Each exhale is deeper. The old wooden floor creaks under slow, padded footsteps. Shadows leach across the chamomile petals, long and gentle, before shrinking into corners. The footsteps keep time with a heartbeat not fast, not slow, but steady, a slow promise that you're safe on the window ledge. A faded cloth washed 100 times. The cloth cradles a little pile of seed pods like tiny reminders of spring. Someone moves a hand through them slowly, brushing away the day's dust. This is how a mind becomes soft and still. One stroke, then another, until even the seed pods seem to settle quietly, dreaming of soil yet to come. From somewhere far off, you might hear the echo of vespers, voices too gentle to disturb, wrapping like extra blankets around shivering shoulders. The hour grows heavier, heartbeats slower. Shadows pour down the walls, pooling at the edges of sleep. A deep breath leaves the chest, and nothing needs to fill the space where it once lived. The veil is drawn across your eyes, once, twice, almost ritualistically, each pass blurring the boundary between thinking and dreaming. There are no lists here. There are no troubles to write. There is only the soft descending, like cloud cover over fields. The old friend's presence lingers, sturdy as oak, a steadying weight that asks nothing from you. Hands fold again, one thumb tracing the other, making circles slow, grounding, hypnotic, until the body forgets to keep track of time. A candle somewhere gutters, then recovers with a sigh. Night gathers her cloak around all living things. Outside, a distant owl marks the hour with a sound so low, it barely stirs the leaves. Inside, a bed waits, open and unmoving, warmed by the day's memory. Even the herbs are tired. Their fragrance now a whisper, asking you to let go, just let go. Bare feet touch the cool stone, and that grounding cold stills you. The steps towards bed are heavier now, but not burdensome. Each one rings with a slow, ancient comfort. The weight of another veil, softer, heavier, drawn across you again and then again. The quiet softens all edges. The world is behind, blurred by the gentle cloth of sleep. There is nothing left but this dark comfort, this gentle fading. The footsteps grow rhythmic again, even slower, a drumbeat to lull the heart, carry it toward dreams, and with each step the body forgets a little more. The final mantra settles in your bones. You are safe here. You are enough. Everything can wait. The veil of night will keep you. Let the ground support you. Let the hush become your friend. And so the story slips away, trailing a steady, sacred